Everyone and their grandma loved Nintendo's quirky avatars, the Miis. But despite appearing inseparable from the Wii to the public eye, these customizable characters were almost never on the console at all. This is the story of the over 20-year struggle the Miis went through to become one of the most viral sensations in gaming history, and how they helped reshape the way people connected with video games, leaving a lasting impact that can still be felt to this day. You remember the Miis? If you're like me, you probably spent hours on the Wii creating virtual versions of your family, friends, and twisted freaks of nature. But did you ever want them to be more? Sure, you could use them as your avatar in Wii Sports, Mario Kart, or Animal Crossing, but that's all they were, avatars. But since their conception, Miis were always intended to go beyond simply avatars. The idea for the Miis started just the way you might expect, with a hamster. In the year 2000, Nintendo released a game called Hamster, The Great Friendship Plan, a licensed game for the Game Boy Color. The main draw to this game, besides of course talking to Hamster, was that you could enter the names and some basic information about your friends, and it would tell you what hamster character they were the most like, and match them up with each other by personality, as sort of a compatibility tester. Despite being a simple game for kids, the game's director Yoshio Sakamoto felt that if Hamster's compatibility testing feature could be expanded on to appeal to a wider audience, that it could be something special. So a few years later, he set out to do just that. This was the inspiration for what would eventually become the Miis. A few years later, Sakamoto became the Group 1 manager of Nintendo's Software Planning and Development Team, or SPD-1, a small team made up mostly of newer Nintendo employees. Keeping in mind the framework from Hamster, Sakamoto had an interesting goal. He said, "Development began when we started thinking about if it was possible to make a DS game which players could not only enjoy inside the game, but one which could also trigger communication outside of it." They began with the basics of entering your friends into the game to test compatibility, but they felt it would be too meaningless if your friends list only had names. This led them to develop a prototype for an avatar creation tool inspired by a Japanese traditional kids game called Fukuwarai. Similar to Pin the Tail on the Donkey, in Fukuwarai, a blindfolded player will try to position facial elements like eyes, nose, and mouth on an empty face where they belong. This prototype would eventually become Tomodachi Collection, a Japan-only game released for the Nintendo DS in June of 2009. But wait, I remember the Miis as far back as 2006. How could this have been the first idea for the Miis? To answer that question, and to truly understand how the Miis came to be, we need to go all the way back to the 1980s, to the beginning of an over 20-year journey of roadblock after roadblock for one of Nintendo's best creative minds. Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto had actually been toying with the idea of a virtual avatar creator as far back as the Famicom Disk System, a floppy disk reading add-on to the Famicom, Japan's version of what we know in the West as the Nintendo Entertainment System. His inspiration was his love of drawing. Miyamoto never felt that he was very good at drawing, but he wanted to capture the joy of creating something and thinking, even I can draw. So Miyamoto's software for the disk system would allow you to change certain facial features, face shape, and hair to create a portrait of a person. His idea was to use one disk to create the characters, and then you would insert a second disk in the system that would use templates to animate your creations. This may seem unimpressive by today's standards, where avatar creation and customization is very common, but this was the 1980s. It wasn't until 1985 that a game would even use the term avatar to describe virtual representations of the player. MMO games of the late 80s and early 90s would start to get a bit more detailed in their customization, but many wouldn't be introduced to the idea until PC games of the early 2000s, like The Sims and Second Life. So in the early 80s, Miyamoto's idea was very ahead of its time. But Miyamoto ran into a wall, as when he presented his prototype to higher-ups at Nintendo, they didn't see how this concept could be turned into a full-fledged game, and the idea was shelved. The next iteration of Miyamoto's idea would see a release, albeit a minor one. In 2000, customizable characters were included in Mario Artist Talent Studio, a a follow-up to Mario Paint released for the N64 disk drive add-on. Players could either import pictures into the game and map them onto polygonal models, or they could create an avatar with realistic-looking facial features. They could then be put into various outfits and animations. The disk drive ended up being a commercial failure though, for a number of reasons, including multiple release delays, only being released in Japan, and an abrupt discontinuation. Add to that the fact that Mario Artist was split into 4 separate titles, and you could see why very few players experienced this character creator. Miyamoto's third attempt, stage debut for the GameCube, carried on the same face mapping idea, but this time relied on an unreleased Game Boy Advance peripheral called the Game Eye to import pictures. What could be done with this game was shown off at E3 2003. Yes, this video is very funny. Miyamoto thought this game would be irresistible to players, but one developer described the roadblock Miyamoto kept running into again and again, saying, "The big problem was, well, what to do with the characters once you'd made them. Once you had created a character that looked like yourself, well, that was it." When we asked people what they thought about it, they always asked, "What are we supposed to do next?" But Miyamoto would not give up this idea. He called it tenacity. But others at the company may not have described it so favorably, with many at Nintendo getting tired of Miyamoto's persistence. 20 years of bringing up this idea again and again for every console, and no one ever really saw the appeal behind it. It became somewhat of a burden on his team. Nintendo President Satoru Iwata said, "There was this mood like, Miyamoto-san's still saying it." Fast forward to early 2006, and Miyamoto was the head of Nintendo's Entertainment Analysis and Development Department, or EAD. This was one of 2 software divisions at the company, with EAD mostly focusing on internally developed titles. Mario, Zelda, most of the big name titles people would recognize. The other software division was SPD, or Software Planning and Development. The head of this division was Nintendo President Satoru Iwata, and focused on assisting external development teams that worked closely with Nintendo. Each of these divisions had different teams that focused on different game series. Miyamoto had been working closely with EAD Team 2, the team developing what would become Wii Sports. He was focused on the feeling of realism for this game. He wanted it to feel like you were really playing the sports, but he didn't feel that realistic-looking muscular models of pro athletes, for example, would be the way to go. The team tried using Nintendo characters as a stand-in for players. You can even find unused animation files in Mario Galaxy that are suspiciously tennis-related. But it felt wrong. It was too familiar, too disconnected. They wanted it to feel like you were the star of the game. The running idea at the time was for the player character to have a design based on kokeshi dolls, simple wooden toys made for children in Japan. You can probably see the influence they had over the final product. But at the same time Wii Sports was in development, Iwata was approached by Yoshio Sakamoto with a prototype for the Mii interface. They were making really good progress, but the team was lost as to what to do beyond the character creator. Sakamoto recalls bringing the idea to Iwata like an excited child. Iwata said usually in a situation like this he would say, "Okay, take your time making this into something more." But aware of Miyamoto's relentless proposals of a similar idea, instead he asked if he could borrow the prototype for a bit. He brought it to Miyamoto and asked him if this is what he had had in mind all this time. Miyamoto said, "This is it. I want this," and went on to scold his team for not coming up with the idea themselves.
So I went back to my team and I said, "You guys are useless." So I told them I didn't need them anymore, and I went and worked with this other team for a few months.
EAD2 had a game, but were missing the right aesthetic. SPD1 had an aesthetic, but were missing a game. And by putting this puzzle together, Miyamoto finally saw an opportunity to realize the idea that had been in his head for over 20 years. But keep in mind, All of this took place in early 2006. The Wii was released in November 2006. So when Miyamoto brought the Mii idea to other departments in the company, suggesting that it be incorporated into the console itself and not just the Wii Sports game, the reaction still wasn't favorable. Along the lines of, almost the whole system is locked down. Why bring this up now? The pushback and time constraint posed some difficulty getting the Miis onto the Wii, but Miyamoto would reason with people, there's no grandparent that's not going to delight in seeing the avatar their grandchild made of them. And with that, he was able to win people over. All of the developers from SPD-1 were told to put their DS idea on hold and were brought over to work on the Wii. For the young new employees to have their first real project at the company be such a monumental one was a golden opportunity. They helped integrate their creation as a core feature of Nintendo's brand new console, being more than just a game, but a utility that could be used across multiple games, the Mii channel. This is where the public was first introduced to the quirky cartoony avatars, and they were a big hit. I was a bit young when the Wii actually came out, so I don't have any memories of it, but those who do remember vividly just how hard it was to get one. Spending 6, 17, 30 hours waiting in lines for the chance to buy a Wii. Mothers and brothers calling and driving to every store in the area to find a place that wasn't sold out. The Wii released November 19th, 2006, and by the end of the year, millions of Wiis had been sold, and hundreds of millions of Miis were being created. Everyone and their grandma, literally, knew who these little avatars were. Miis were helping to accomplish a goal Nintendo had set out to do with the Wii from the very beginning. As Satoru Iwata detailed in 2004, Nintendo was working on a console that would create a gaming revolution. You can find a hint at what that revolution was supposed to be in the console's final name.
Wii from Nintendo means just what it sounds like. Wii. It's the sound of inclusion, the sound of every gamer you know and every new gamer who's going to join us. It's a giant leap for gaming, for everyone around the world.
In the 80s, 90s, and even 2000s, there was a huge stigma against video games as a form of entertainment. That stigma does still exist, and it may never completely go away, but it was especially prevalent then.
Maybe you will be brain dead from staring at this thing all the time. No.
Nintendo wanted to tackle that stigma head on. Their goal? Make gaming for everyone.
Let me start with a couple of questions for you. Do you know anyone who's never watched TV? Never seen a movie? Never read a book? Of course not. So let me ask you one more question. Do you know someone, maybe even in your own family, who's never played a video game? I bet you do. How can this be? If we want to consider ourselves a true mass medium, if we want to grow as an industry, this has to change.
Nintendo wanted to reach people with their games no matter their language, age, or even their current opinion on gaming, especially those who had never played video games before. And how did they do? It's amazing to me that Nintendo created an experience that a child, their parents, even their grandparents can not only play, but enjoy all at the same time in the same room together. Between the accessibility of the motion controls and the inherently personal nature of the Miis, Nintendo definitely achieved its goal: gaming for everyone. For me personally, the only time I can say I've ever played a video game with a grandparent, it was on the Wii. My mom, who I'd rarely ever see play a video game, probably spent just as much time in Animal Crossing City Folk as I did. And even just a few months ago, I had a friend who bought a Switch and got into gaming herself for the first time, all because of the memories she had of her family being brought together by the Wii. When I asked people on Reddit about their experiences with the Wii, the post was filled with heartwarming memories of the Wii bringing people together with their families and friends. many of which that had never tried or were even against video games. This Reddit user said his dad hates video games, but when it came to Wii Sports golf, his dad would be the one begging him to come play. He said, "It was really funny watching him take a full polished golf swing with the Wii remote, and I did a clumsy gamer swing and got similar results, but he loved it." Another user said his friend's parents were entirely against video games in the home. But because the Wii was designed as the system for the whole family, they persuaded his mom to let him play the Wii over at his apartment. And when his mom came to pick him up, she was surprised to see her son enjoying a colorful game of Mario Kart, far from the mind-numbing violence like the media had led her to think gaming was. And a year later, the mom even surprised her son with a gift, his very own DS. And this user touched on one of the most unexpected but fascinating impacts the Wii has had, on the elderly living in nursing homes.
That's it. Got it.
Going into the 10th frame, 88-year-old Delita Montgomery is up by 1 pin.
I like the action. I like to beat.
Her competitor, 86-year-old Meinhard Boshi, was a competitive bowler in the 1940s with a 180 average.
I bowled on a league in the Army.
Neither one of these two have been able to bowl in years. Now they're engaged in a serious competition on the Nintendo Wii.
How'd you do that?
I just think it's wonderful. I just think it's going to really improve their lives.
It's reignited passions, created some healthy competition.
Well, I beat you by 7 pins, Mr.
You did!
You can buy my lunch.
But more importantly, brought a smile to their faces,
That's a good game.
even if they lose.
I just think it's beautiful to see the positive effect that can come from transforming a medium to be more accessible. The Reddit user had some really interesting thoughts on why this became such a phenomenon, saying about his grandmother, "She busted a hip about 20 years before going into the nursing home by slipping on an icy sidewalk. Her mobility never allowed her to go back out and bowl again." Thinking about it some more and Googling how popular bowling would have been for her generation gave me a theory that bowling was nostalgic for that generation. The 40s through the 70s are apparently the golden years of bowling. That probably would have been the prime socializing ages for many. There was something that never made sense as to why it caught on so well at the homes, but I never gave it this much thought till now. But a minigame that tapped the nostalgia of their younger years, a controller that allowed them to simulate the same action they remembered, I wonder if this was possibly therapeutic even. It's stories like these that really show how significant an impact the Wii had on people of all ages and views. It really was a revolution in gaming. A positive turning point for video games that showed how well games can bring people together and make them happy. The Wii helped set the foundation for a huge shift in how gaming as a whole was perceived, expanding its reach, bridging the gap between old and young, truly making gaming accessible to everyone. To the point that now, gaming is more widely accepted than it's ever been. And the Miis, that simple concept of putting yourself and your loved ones in the game, was a huge part of that. But in all of the Wii's success, one thing fell to the wayside. Despite millions enjoying playing the Wii, the original concept behind the Miis, to make a game that creates real-life social interaction even when the game isn't being played, was left unrealized. The next time I talk about the Miis, I'll be diving into what SPD1 did to accomplish that goal with Tomodachi Collection and Tomodachi Life, and why it's a miracle that this game was even ever released in the West. If you'd like for that video to pop up in your feed, subscribe to the channel. It would make me very happy.